Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the first of a webinar series through the education sector at JPAL. We're spotlighting a number of new policy relevant studies that are coming out of the network. So this includes work to bring structured pedagogy interventions to scale, use of personalized adaptive learning in the classroom, among other areas. But today's webinar is focused on exciting new results from TaRL in Zambia. And so with that, I'll hand it to Dave Evans, who directs the Global Education and Child Wellbeing Program at the Center for Global Development, and he will be the moderator for the panel today.
Thanks so much, Maddie, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone who's on the line. I am really excited about this session that we have today. It won't come as a surprise to anyone who's logged onto this that we are still in a world where far too few children are mastering the foundational literacy skills that they need in the early grades to succeed. I've been really excited to see new evidence from different sources in recent months confirming what I think most of us intuitively would have believed, which is that there are very large returns to mastering these literacy skills in the early grades. That even when we think about historically we've thought about the returns to education maybe 10% per year. That in fact just the monetary returns, how much more people make if they master these foundational literacy skills in early years, are dramatically higher than we expected before. So the question is, how do we achieve that? And today we're talking about one program intended to do that, which is Catch Up, a national program in Zambia, which adapts a program which many of us know as teaching at the right level. Across lots of countries, teachers are faced with classrooms that have students at wildly different learning levels. You could have a fourth grade class with some students at the fourth grade level, but also students at the third, second, first, and even kind of pre-literate levels. And so Teaching at the Right Level is a program that's developed in India with Pratham, demonstrated to help teachers reach students where they are. It can take a lot of different forms. And today we're going to hear about how that's been applied in this program, Catch Up, in Zambia. So to start off, and we're going to have a lot of time for questions and discussion. And so we hope that you will sort of be paying attention. There's room in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to jot down questions as they come to you. We're going to start with two brief presentations. We're going to hear from Dr. Langston Chibuye, who chairs the Catch Up Coordinating Committee, where he's led the National Teaching at the Right Level program in Zambia. And he's going to give us an overview of Catch Up. And then we're also going to hear from Professor Andreas de Barros, who is a JPAL invited researcher and assistant professor at the School of Education at the University of California, Irvine, who has worked with the government of Zambia to evaluate Catch Up Zambia. And so we're excited to hear those, both that overview and those results. I want to check, do we have Dr. Chibuye with us yet? I know we had a few connection challenges on his side.
He's still facing some connection issues, but he should be joining us soon.
Okay. So does it make sense? I realize this is a little bit out of order. Does it make sense potentially for Andy, for you to walk through the evaluation with the background that we have there, and then Langston can then give us a sense of how this fits into Zambia's system as it stands. Would that work?
Sounds good. Let me do
Okay.
that.
Andy, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, and thanks.
First joined by Dr. Chibuye, right?
Oh, great. Okay. Should we go back, Dave?
Yeah, let's go ahead. I think that's right. So welcome, Dr. Langston Chibuye, and we're very glad you could make it. We're excited to have you give us a brief overview of how Catch Up fits within Zambia's education system and how it's been going.
I will share your slides, Dr. Chibuye. Just let me know when you're able to see them.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm happy to have joined the team. Sorry, we are ready to go. I actually joined earlier. I was listening, but I couldn't contribute because I was using a phone. So I'm with Teresa, and we'll look at the catch-up in Zambia. I think from the time the pilot was taken up to scale, where are we? So, the next slide. Okay. So, as a way of starting, I think when you look at the picture that was on your right-hand side, you see, learners looking at the syllable. So Zambia has embarked on a series of measures to look at issues of foundation learning. How do we build foundation learning? And in Zambia, the biggest program we have to support remediation is called the Catch-Up. So Catch-Up is our remedial program. It is our teaching at the right level model, but in Zambia, we call it Catch-Up. So when we say Catch-Up, we are actually talking about the TaRL model. This is our remedial program. In fact, in Zambia, two things that we are doing for the remediation, it is Catch-Up. For in-class, it supports the primary literacy program. So where are we coming from? What is the challenge? Why Catch-Up? I think from many statistics, we see that children are not reading. And 65% of children in 2014 couldn't read and write. And I think the trend has continued because in 2022, World Bank conducted the study and still found that 98.5% of our learners are not reading. So this challenge has been with us. It is still with us, making our catch-up program very, very relevant to support our learners. So 65% 2014 children in grade 2 were not able to read a single word. This was a big problem to us. Next slide. So, in response, Ministry of Education, Zambia, felt we needed to do a national remedial education strategy, and we worked with different partners. We worked with UNICEF, we worked with JPAL, we worked with Pratham, we worked with DFID, we worked with VVOB, we also worked with the USAID, though not mentioned here. And together, we tried to contextualize the teaching at the right level. We developed a contextualized version known as Catch-Up. So this is the intervention that we made. And I know in 2016, we had a team of Zambian people, our directors that went to India to look at the teaching at the right level methodology. We were happy. We felt the model was relevant to Zambia. So we brought it and contextualized it. Next slide. So how is the intervention running? For us in Zambia, we are starting from grades 3, 4, from grade 3 through grade 4 to grade 5. And of course, our primary school system begins from grade 1. At the age 7, children are in grade 1. Then age 8, children are in grade 2. So age 9, children were in grade 3. We know the age has been revised. So it's grade 3, 4, and 5. So the TaRL methodology includes a lot of fun, play-related activity, building confidence in learners with a lot of learning activities that are given to give learning opportunities to children. Because we want to believe that if children experience activities by doing them, it's easy for them to learn. And of course, there's one-on-one assessment that is conducted. Maybe we can go to the previous slide. One-on-one assessment that are conducted. And of course, catch-up lessons are included in the school calendar as an extra hour. So when pupils knock off, after knocking off, an extra hour is given, and teachers from government are supporting the model. We can go to the next slide. So this one is just showing us where we are, catch-up scale. We are in 9 provinces. We may not say much on this one. Let's go to the next slide in the interest of time. And of course, when you check here on your left-hand side, 2017 year, when we started implementing catch-up, we only started with 8 schools. And children, the number of children were 2,176 in 2017. And of course, we are in Eastern and Southern province. Over the years, almost 9 years down the line, 2025, we have 6,300 children from 6,300 schools, from 80 schools to 6,000. To us, this is the greatest achievement, and we see scale at this stage. In terms of children reached, we have 1 million children reached, 2,000 in 2017, in 2025, 1 million children. And if you check the provinces, we only started with Eastern in 2017, Eastern and Southern. In 2025, we have actually rolled out to 9 provinces. In 2026, this year, we are in all the 10 provinces. So from 2 provinces to 10 provinces, we can move. Next slide. So, key characteristics of catch-up. And sometimes I like appreciating the pictures that are given, because you can see that actually these activities are learner-centered. It is the learners that are taking center stage to learn, and learners are doing activity. Learners are more confident and free. From the picture, you can see that learners are doing their actual activities, and the teachers can focus on specific goals. The teacher will look at the needs of each learner, set the goals, and target the goals based on the weaknesses of the learners. Teachers are required to prepare for lessons, lesson planning. Teachers feel free to be creative. Mentorship, monitoring, very important, and a renewed focus on numeracy. So you can see that the characteristics are that learner-centered, and teachers are actually preparation of teaching and learning materials. I only have 10 minutes, you bear with me, so I'm trying to cruise. We can go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, so we've been implementing the catch-up. Now we can say for 10 years now, because this is 2026. And what lessons have we learned? Lesson number 1, invest in leadership, school leadership, instruction leadership, then you achieve whatever you want. It's not trained, school leadership is left behind. The school leaders are gate takers. So we train them, we open the gates. Very important, school leadership, quality. Then lessons learned, effective teacher monitoring is critical. Issues of accountability. When we train teachers, teachers begin implementing. Let's have continuous monitoring of what they're doing. So again, catch-up presents an opportunity for learners to re-enter the education system. To us, this is making a lot of difference in our schools, because government has introduced free education, and we see a lot of children that were in the streets, children that have never been to school coming back to the school system. So it supports the free education policy, because then children are not paying any extra amount for extra tuition. Our teachers in government schools are providing, this remediation. So it creates an opportunity for learners to re-enter the education system and quickly catch up at the level of the rest of the pupils. Next, lessons learned, school-based support to teachers is essential. Just back to the slide, how quickly. Okay, so practicing new methods are essential for teachers. Parental involvement, let's not leave out the parents, and issues of school feeding, very important to support the implementation of catch-up. Next slide. Evaluation overview. So the catch-up program was evaluated through an independent research. We actually conducted the research through an independent researcher, which we called the randomized trial, the randomized control trial, and of course by external researchers, because we felt ourselves, if we conducted the research, maybe we'll be biased. So we had to, through our partners, invite an external person to come and conduct research. So it was implemented in multiple provinces, the research, and then it examined how effective the catch-up model was, and the evaluation provides rigorous evidence to inform education policy. So from the RCT, a lot of recommendations were raised, and these are helping us to begin creating new policy to guide. So what are the results presented? And I know the results will be presented by Andy. Andy will be able to provide the results. So Zambia catch-up RCT findings and how they are informing policy. This one I can do. Okay. Okay, I can still handle this one, but I know Mr. Andy should be able to speak through it later on. Okay. So, arising from the research that was conducted as part of policy formulation, what policies are we deriving from the research? So how do we make our findings speak into what we do? So 11 changes were proposed, and these 11 changes can be grouped into sharper targeting, into data drives the classroom, and into strong delivery. So the first change is that of course, we've been targeting, like I said earlier, on grade 3, 4, and 5. So we will now move and make a change so that we begin targeting grade 2, 3, and 4. And we are trying to align the catch-up to the competence-based curriculum that was introduced in 2023. That is change number 1. Change number 2, we feel we need to come up with a new exit criteria in literacy and numeracy to free up space for learners who still need more support. So what will happen is that if we have 50 learners in the catch-up class, we continue testing them. And those that are getting the skills will make them exit the catch-up and do other things so that we remain with those learners that still have critical challenges. This will help us to maintain class size. Change number 3, teaching materials and teacher training are being revised to match to the upgraded model. So we are starting rigorous trainings of all the teachers that are teaching grade 2, 3, and 4 to make them up to speed with what is happening. So in terms of data, 2 of 5 weekly remedial hours are now allocated. Okay, let me just walk through. So we have remedial hours that are allocated every week. So 5 hours are allocated every week for catch-up. And of course, we are developing an online dashboard to strengthen real-time data. Systems are being improved. And on the far right, the language of instruction will now follow the new curriculum. In the previous catch-up, before the revised curriculum, we're using the local language only. But this time, under catch-up, we'll develop local language and English as medium of instruction. So it will be local language and English and numeracy. And the remedial hour stays outside. Of course, it's 1 hour outside the normal timetable. And those learners that we are graduating will be used as learning buddies to give support to fellow learners. We want to believe that a learner speaking to a fellow learner will bring in a lot of difference because young people speak the same language. So those that have graduated can still be used, some of them that are outstanding. Next slide. So I think for now, I can say this is what we have for the catch-up in terms of what is catch-up in Zambia and in terms of what are we doing to the RCT research, how are we making it help government to do policy. But I also want to make mention that government in Zambia is fully supporting the catch-up because even our members of parliament are now sitting in class to support the catch-up program. And now, based on the research, we have conversations where government is saying next year we need to develop a budget line for catch-up. So we expect government to push in a lot of money in catch-up to help sustain. We would want to sustain catch-up beyond donor support. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Langston. This is a fabulous introduction, and I think the scale that you've reached with catch-up is pretty breathtaking. And we're going to circle back on some of those lessons learned that you highlighted. We're already getting some questions in the Q&A, which we will come to, but keep putting those questions in the Q&A tab as they come along, and we will come to those when we get to the discussion. But the big question, as you know, I'm an evaluator, the big question that I always have is, well, how well did it work? And so now we'll hear a little bit from Andy on how well it worked.
Thanks so much, Dr. Chibuye, for the background and obviously, thank you so much for partnering in this evaluation. And as Dave says, they're going to present the results of the study where we evaluated the effect of catch-up, the national adaptation of the teaching at the right level program in Zambia. This is joint work with my co-author, Teresa Luboja, who's here with us and who can also field some of the questions, I hope. So thanks a lot. So even beyond Zambia, as Dave mentioned, I think a lot of governments are currently making this big bet that if you get the foundations right, if you get the basics right, then everything else will follow, right? So you can take the economic view of this that is highly positive about this and says like skills beget skills, or building on the basics. Once you have these foundational skills, everything is going to follow, right? And you can think of this into two adjacent skills, like you know how to read numbers, and therefore you will also develop other math skills, for example. But you can also think about this more in the long run and think about this in terms of the long run skill development, right? And if you talk to economists, they're very much sold on this, and they have also sold a lot of governments on this. If you talk to cognitive scientists, they also very much think about this kind of skill building. But they're much more sober about this and much more cautious. And they would probably say that, skills do not translate so easily, and they will not build skills, right? So I think we have a wonderful, example here of a program that provides that test, right? Clearly, that the Zambia program in itself is super interesting, but I think we're also learning something about this, big bet that a lot of governments are making as to like, if I focus on the basics, will the rest follow, right? And I want to present on this today. Where we're going with this, quickly in a nutshell, the results that I'm going to be presenting you today is that the catch-up program indeed did raise the targeted skills, especially in math, very much so. So in grades 3 to 5, particularly the skills targeted by the program, such as basic arithmetic, number recognition, and so forth, increased a lot, improved a lot. However, at least in the short run, these improvements stayed very narrow. So they're very much centered or focused in those foundational skills that the program tries to build, right? And there was very little transfer to adjacent skills. And I'm going to say a little bit more about what I mean by that. So a very sobering story in that way. However, when I then look at effects on national grade 7 exams that are much more complicated, are much more advanced at these basic skills that the program promotes, right? We actually see positive effects at the end of grade 7. So this really, really interesting tension that the short run improvements are very specific, whereas then we do see these long run broad human capital gains, which for me personally is very fascinating, right? So what I'm presenting today are really two studies in maybe a little more than 10 minutes, right? And both though are providing us the evaluation of this national catch-up program in Zambia. So I start with study number 1, which is one of the largest ever education experiments. To my knowledge, it's certainly the biggest education RCT ever conducted on the African continent, which documents the program effects of catch-up on foundational skills after 2 years of exposure as kids move from grades 3 to grade 5, right? So what we did here in this randomized trial is we, as the program expanded in the country, we took 182 zones and randomized these 182 zones into 91 control zones, which you see here in purple, and then 91 treatment zones that would receive the program as the program scaled into these new zones, which are shown here in orange, right? So we randomized all of these 1,115 schools as an RCT with 1,115 schools into either receiving the program or not. Right? And then what Dr. Chibuya did not mention, we actually also had a pilot version of a new continuous professional development program for teachers, where within the treatment zones, we took one of these treatment schools and introduced a new continuous professional development program for teachers, right? And there the idea is that we know that a lot of these programs are really hard to scale, and we tried a new continuous professional development program for teachers that tried to get teachers to collaborate more and support them throughout the year. And all of this built on a separate qualitative study that I published with co-authors separate before and a year of piloting together with the government and VVOB. Right? So this big picture then gives us the overall program effect in the version that the program runs at a very large scale in the country. And then we have this mini pilot evaluation of this extra continuous professional development program for teachers. So here then you see the 273 schools that we subsampled from these 1,115 schools. And within them, we sampled over 8,000 learners that were in grade 3, and then we tracked these grade 3 learners over time. So we had a 2022 baseline, and then we tracked them over 2 years. We did school visits in between, and then what I'm presenting today are mostly the effects on learning, but we have a wide range of outcomes that we have in the paper, right? Here are some pictures from the field. Really, like, kudos here to everybody who was involved here in data collection, just showing you how hard it is to collect some of this data. If you know rural Zambia, schools are very much farly spread out. It's really hard to reach these schools. So here you see some of our data collection team traveling to these schools, and in this case, sleeping in one school to move to yet another school, and then all of the assessments are done one-on-one with no teachers involved with an independent evaluation team. Right? Moving to the results that I mentioned already. So in the short term, in literacy, we see an effect of about 10% of a standard deviation over this course of 2 years. Standard deviations are difficult to communicate. So if you translate this into years of learning over this 2-year period that are in addition to what usually happens during the school year, you can express this as 2.2 months of extra learning, or about an extra month of learning that the kids wouldn't have had in the absence of the program. In math, the results on foundational skills are slightly larger, even, so they're about 15% of a standard deviation, or about 3 months of extra learning over this 2-year period, about a month and a half or 6 weeks of extra learning over 1 school year. And through Dave Evans and others' comparative work, we know that this would place the program in about the top 20 to 30% of impacts observed in other large-scale education experiments, especially if these are programs that are run by government, where usually we see results come down. So if you just look at the overall effect on foundational skills, it's highly encouraging, really testament to a government being able to improve foundational skills after a 2-year intervention period. Right? Now, because I built all of these assessments myself, I know exactly where these gains come from, and I want to share a little bit more where we see these improvements coming from, which kind of skills these program improvements come from in both math and in literacy. So in math, the program is highly focused on a set of foundational skills that are a subset of what we usually refer to foundational skills, being number recognition and basic arithmetic, and less applied, but more like rote arithmetic. And that's exactly where we see these gains coming from. So the effects in math are highly skill specific, and they are 0.4 standard deviation impacts on that domain compared to this 15% standard deviation overall effect on foundational skills, right? So highly targeted, very large effect on exactly the skills that the program tries to promote, which is great, right? At the same time, that means that there is hardly any improvement on other skills that are also part of foundational skills. So something like spatial skills, geometry, but even something that is fairly adjacent, we don't see any improvements there. So for example, a child can now read a number, but then if you ask a child to read price tags and compare prices, the child is at a loss, and we don't see any improvements on that skill. Right? So highly targeted improvements on these very basic number recognition and arithmetic skills, but very little transfer to other skills. In literacy, we don't have such targeting in terms of a subset of skills that the program tries to promote. But even in literacy, we have a high specificity in terms of the impacts, because the literacy effects really come from what is sometimes called pre-literacy. What I mean with this is something like decoding. Like, can you read a letter? Can you read a word? Right? But we actually don't see any measurable impact on higher order foundational skills in terms of, like, can a child then actually read a paragraph, or can a child actually read a story? And I want to pause here and really highlight that this is an absolute failure of the program. It is a failure if after 2 years of being in the program, 2/3 of children still cannot read. And we don't see any measurable impact on the percentage of kids who can read a paragraph, right? So yes, it is a success that the improvements come from whether children can now read a word or can read a letter. And that's great, right? But I think we need to be honest here that if after 2 years of being in a teaching at the right level program, 2/3 of the children cannot read a paragraph, short paragraph, and we don't see any improvements on that measure, that clearly is a problem that needs to be addressed. We have many additional insights, but I quickly want to highlight 2 of those. One is that the exposure to the program is actually super low. So in terms of compliance and program implementation, all of these schools run this program. But if you ask kids whether they went to school and whether you check whether they were in school, only half of them actually attend school daily. And then if you look at like if they're in school, whether they're actually exposed to the program, in total, only about a third of the kids are actually being exposed to these daily sessions, right? Which might explain why the program effect is much lower than in other contexts, whereas I have documented massive effects of similar remedial programs, right? The second insight is related to this additional continuous professional development program that was tried out in this pilot, right? The usual cost over this 2-year period per student is about $10, right? The catch-up plus additional CPD variant of the program doubled that cost. And when we compare these two treatment arms, we actually don't see any improvement. So in that sense, there's zero returns of adding these additional expenses. And therefore, actually, what I'm presenting to you, because these results are so similar, I'm actually pulling these two arms together, and I'm always just showing you what the overall effect is of the program, just because this additional continuous professional development program didn't do anything in terms of additional learning gains. So the big question then is, if a program only succeeds at teaching a narrow set of skills without short-term transfer, does it actually help children in the long run? Right? And you might actually look at these results, and some people think of them as great because here is a government that produced these respectable improvements in foundational learning. But then I think it is very honest to also point at the failure of, for example, in literacy, improving the actual skills that are likely to matter more, at least in the short run, such as, for example, whether children can read a paragraph or whether they can read a story. But this is then the real big question, right? And this is what we answer in the same paper in a separate study, right? So in this paper, we have a separate study that analyzes all the primary school leaving exam scores over 12 years in the country. So these are 4.4 million exam scores per subject, so about 9 million exam scores. And this really shows you what the program does when kids are then taking these primary school leaving exams. They are grade 7 exams in Zambia when kids are in early adolescence, right? And here we're really leveraging this national scale-up of the program that we saw in Dr. Jabiu's presentation, since the program has come to different districts in different points of time that allows us to use what are called a staggered difference in difference methodology. And without these fancy words, basically what this does is it compares locations that when they get the program versus program that haven't gotten the program yet. And then it looks after the program has come at later exam scores. These exams, and I want to pause here, Teresa did a wonderful job meeting with the assessment authority that administers these exams to look at what exactly these exams measure. And what these exams measure, again, these are grade 7 leaving exams. They measure comprehensive skills well above what we usually consider foundational skills. So in math, for example, only 4% of these test questions really cover the target foundational math skills, being stuff that you should learn in grades 1 to 3, in terms of, let's say, number in operations and number knowing, right? So these are well beyond, these are your typical advanced grade 7 exams, right? So what do we find here? We do see, in the long run, positive effect on these exam scores. So about a 14% of a standard deviation impact on literacy exam scores, and about an 11% of a standard deviation impact on math exam scores. I'm showing you this graph quickly to walk you through it. What you see here is the vertical line is when the program comes. But remember, the program focuses on grades 3 to 5. So you actually need to wait for these kids to then reach grade 7, which is what I'm showing you in blue. So the first dot right next to it is you shouldn't expect anything because the program hasn't touched any 7th graders, right? But then you need to wait, and you need to wait for fully exposed cohorts. If they move through the program and then just have normal grade progression, they would reach these exams by what I'm showing you here in the blue area. If they're held up and maybe retained, it actually takes them longer, which might be why you see this kind of like upward trajectory. It could also be that the program just matures and becomes better in terms of its implementation. And that's why you might see this upwards trajectory. But certainly by the time when these kids are expected to have been fully exposed to the program and have reached these grade 7 exam scores, that's where we see this uptick in these exam scores, which are these positive effects on these much more advanced math scores and much more advanced language scores. Right? So summing this all up, right? It's a complex picture, so let me bring it all together. So we have short-run high effects in math on these targeted skills being basic arithmetic, right? So very large effects, 40% of the standard deviation. In literacy, the program does no such targeting, so that's why I left it out here. If you just talk about foundational skills broadly, we do see some positive effects. In math, there are a mix between these targeted skills that improve a lot and zero effect on the other skills. In literacy, they're really coming from pre-literacy skills such as letter recognition or being able to read words, but they really do not translate into whether kids, for example, can read a paragraph, right? Which is usually the key performance indicator, or KPI, which these programs are usually measured after 2 years, right? So if you look at, let's say, paragraph reading as a KPI, we don't see any improvements. If they're in by that metric, the program would have failed, right? Whereas in math, if you take a metric such as subtraction, we see something like an 8 percentage point improvement. Even in math, something like half of the kids at the end of the 2-year program still cannot subtract, right? So then in the short run, we don't see any transfer, right? Which could be really frustrating if you look at this and if you want to go by that metric. But then in terms of the long run, we do see these positive improvements on grade 7 scores that are much more advanced and much more comprehensive, right? So then altogether, you could think of this as really like a win for everybody who's interested in long-term skill development. It's a win for everybody who is currently making this bet that if you build the foundational skills, this will have long-run effects on much more advanced skills, and really the skills beget skills theory, which is super interesting. In the short run, however, I think clearly this shows a real need to improve the program, to make it stronger, because again, if after 2 years of being in the program, 2/3 of the children still cannot read a paragraph, there's a serious problem. And I think there's a lot of potential to improve on that and further work on the program. So I'm excited to hear from everybody and hear their thoughts, but I'm also around here in the chat to answer any questions. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Those are the fascinating results, and the time path of results in particular is really intriguing. As you say, this fact that we do see some gains, some real long-term gains, even without the short-term transfer. Okay, so thanks so much. And I think we can stop sharing the screen in a moment once people have, there are also links to the working paper in the chat. I want to introduce the rest of our panel. So in addition to Langston and Andy, we have Daniil Ressler, who's the Director of Research, Learning, and Evaluation at Teaching at the Right Level Africa. We have Teresa Luboja, who we already saw a little bit sharing a screen with Langston, who's a strategic education advisor for research and learning at the nonprofit VVOB, which has played an integral role in this program. And we also have Jonathan Stern, who is Deputy Director of Global Education at the Gates Foundation. So I'm going to do a few questions that I have, and then I am aware of the questions that we have in the Q&A. I'm excited to get to those. So I want to start with it going back to Langston. One of the things that I see in the Q&A, Langston, is how much, like a lot of our audience, is people from other countries that are really interested in this experience. And so, if you think about this effort to scale up, and you were to pull out, you mentioned a number of challenges, that the monitoring is key, getting the parents involved. If you were going to pull out 1 or 2 elements that you said, these are the absolutely crucial considerations for scaling up, what would you say they are?
So one crucial consideration for scale
Correct.
is ensuring that we begin seeing government budget. If we see government budget, then we are sure that sustainability will be in place. So the biggest thing is to see our own resources from our government in Zambia, and that we are doing. Next year, a budget line is guaranteed. What we remain with is to look at the figure. Number 2 is bringing on board almost everyone, starting from the permanent secretary. And for your own information, in Zambia, we are lucky, because even His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, is supporting foundation learning. So if we have support from the President, we have support from members of Parliament, we have support from all directors and from traditional leaders, then we know that we are good to go. So 2 things that I've mentioned. Thank you.
That's fabulous. And I could just ask a follow-up on the budget. I think, and I've seen this in programs in early childhood in Brazil, the crucial role of moving to a government budget line is really important. And So how was the program funded up until this point?
So funding was in twofold. One, first funding in terms of financial resources came from a partner. We know UNICEF and working with VVOB and working with the World Vision, working with TaRL Africa, working with Zambia Open Community Schools, with support from the Hampel Foundation and many other partners pushed in, money. But in terms of technical support, like I'm speaking here, I'm coming from government, and this time I'm spending here, if you were to quantify my pay, it's a lot of money. So you'll see government contribution coming through me. We are talking, I'm spending a lot of time, and I'm not getting any pay from any of the organizations, but it's government pushing in resources. So government has pushed in all the human resource. The partners pushed in money. But we are saying, in as much as government is pushing in human resource, can we also begin seeing some form of budget?
Absolutely. No, I think that is crucial, and that broad coalition of funding from the outset is important. I want to come to Teresa from VVOB. Obviously, you guys have been close partners from the outset. A lot of the people that we have on this webinar are partners. What are a couple of key lessons that you've taken from this collaborative effort?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think one of the things that we've taken note of is understanding Ministry of Education's priorities. So one of the things is we work closely with them through, in partnership with different directorates at the national level. We work with them at provincial level, at school level, through the teachers. And through this, we've noticed that through the understanding of government priorities in terms of what is it that they need in terms of improving the catch-up program, we have managed to scale the program together. We've worked with ministry in different capacities, and on this journey, we've been together for the past 10 years. And this has strengthened our relationship, and we've gotten government buy-in. That's why it was even actually easy for us to get government buy-in for us to do the randomized control trial, because this is their program and it's owned by the Ministry of Education. So I think I've seen a couple of questions that are actually been asking on if there's any incentives around teachers. This is a Ministry of Education program, and everything that VVOB and other partners do is in line with what the Ministry of Education priorities is. Secondly, I think the other lesson is that through some of the review meetings that we have, we've gotten to understand how the government understands the data and interprets the data, and how they actually use this to scale. And this is what they've been using to even inform their scaling even at the national level. So we have review meetings at 3 times a year, and this will start at the school level and scale up at the national level, where we'll actually sit with Ministry of Education, understand their priorities, the challenges that they're facing in terms of implementation, teacher motivation, learner engagement, and we work together to resolve some of those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have one follow-up for you. You mentioned early on, and I thought this was really interesting. This obviously, one is understanding the government's priorities. And then you also talked about getting buy-in from the government. So I'd love just to hear a little bit more about the process. Like, how much were people bought in from the beginning? How did you achieve buy-in? If some areas, some groups within government were less bought in from the outset?
So as for Chambi,
Okay, thank you so much. I think this has been collaborative effort with the Ministry of Education, where first of all, as I mentioned, the review meetings have been very key, because there you get to understand the data that is actually coming in from the school, and you sit down with ministry and ensure that they actually understand what those numbers actually mean for the learning outcomes for the learners. So that has been one of the key issues that one of the ways that we've actually gotten government buy-in. Building on our relationship, I think looking at VVOB's stay in Zambia, we actually just celebrated 40 years in Zambia. This means we've supported Ministry of Education at different capacities, and foundational learning is just one of those areas where we've actually noticed that it's Ministry of Education's priority, and we look at the needs. So we look at teacher education, we look at learner engagement, we look at even community engagement at times to just ensure that we have that buy-in from ministry. And when we're working with ministry, we are not the ones leading. We follow what the ministry wants to do. So you get to understand what is it that the ministry or the teachers on the ground will actually respond to, and then you present what you have, the new dialogue, and make sure that you reach an understanding of what exactly that might actually work. We have a number of work that we're doing currently, and this has all been through engaging with ministry closely and ensuring that at each level they're not left behind, but we're moving together and making sure that they're actually understanding every aspect of the work that we're doing. Thank you.
That's fabulous. And I think it is impossible to overestimate the value of that sort of long-term engagement. I want to come to Jonathan now from the Gates Foundation. Like Andy showed us these results. In some ways, the short-term literacy results are, as Andy underlined, a little underwhelming, right? In terms of kids being able to, read a paragraph or read a story or anything like that. So if, obviously you do a lot of advising across, people working in a lot of different countries. How do you think about what this study tells us about how we should think about tackling foundational literacy in other countries? And if you were going to do one thing different here to try to sort of achieve that brass ring of getting kids to that literacy in those early grades, what would it be?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So I took several pages of notes during both presentations, so I assume I have 40 to 45 minutes to respond here. Is that correct? So no, I mean, exciting to see this, obviously, as you and Andy both mentioned, right? There are the strengths and the limitations in terms of what we're seeing here. And I think there are a few main things that it made me think about as I was listening to them today. The first, which someone actually put in the Q&A as a question as well, is there was a slide presented on the key characteristics of catch-up. And those are all just good teaching practices, right? And so the question is, for me, and when we're thinking about how do we improve systems, why are those just catch-up practices in Zambia? Why are they seen as what is good about catch-up and not things that are seen as this is what teachers should be doing as their core instructional time, right? And so how are we learning from what is happening in those best practices and transferring them outside of just remediation hours into core instructional time? I think that's something that could help with that transfer across skills that Andy was saying was limited, and likely have a longer or bigger long-term effects as well. I mean, I think there's a question, the effects Andy noted, each in literacy and numeracy, it's about an extra month per year of learning. That comes with these extra remediation hours, right? Relative to a control where they're just getting regular core instructional time. So my question would be, is it enough, right? Like, is that where we'd want it to be? Is if you give kids more instruction on some targeted skills, you would hope they would learn more on those targeted skills, right? And so are the gains sufficient for the additional investment that we are putting in outside? And once again, this brings me back to this idea of, so how can we then integrate that and broaden it beyond just that extra hour? And how do we think about getting to a world where we don't need the remediation continuing, right? Our goal shouldn't be to scale remediation for the sake of scaling it, right? The goal should be scale remediation for a short period of time such that people no longer need it as you're improving core instructional time. And then over time, what is the phase out plan for having this extra investment beyond the core instruction? And the last thing I will say is, absenteeism was noted as a major constraint. And, we've talked about this a bunch in terms of, yes, that is a system constraint, but what are other implementation issues, fidelity of implementation issues that we're seeing within this model within Zambia? And how do we think about how we can innovate and improve upon the model? Right? There is evidence that it works. That's clear from outside Zambia and from this case study as well. But because something works, it doesn't mean it's the best version it can be. Right? So how do we continue improving upon it and innovating such that we deal with issues like absenteeism, other fidelity issues, have larger gains within that remediation time, but think really critically around what does this mean for core instruction and how does this fit as one piece of an ecosystem and not just a standalone solution to the problem of children not learning foundational skills in Zambia.
Yeah, I think those are great reflections. I think on the absenteeism, it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently in my own work, about this fact that, children can't benefit from any program. They can't benefit from core instruction. They can't benefit from catch up. They can't benefit from a structured pedagogy program if they are not in that classroom. So I want to circle back, and then we'll definitely come to Daniil, but I just want to circle back really quick. So first, I'd love to invite Andy to reflect a little bit on the implementation issues that you saw, and if you saw over the course of this evaluation any sort of obvious ways where those could, be improved. And then I want to quickly come back to Langston on, Jonathan highlighted this important point that catch up is helping kids catch up, but is Zambia doing anything to improve core instruction, like the basic instruction, so that fewer kids need to catch up going forward? So, and, I know we've got a lot of questions, not too much time, so I'm going to encourage people to be efficient. But Andy.
Great. Yes, implementation, I think, is one of the biggest issues, right? I mean, if so little of this program still produces a lot, right? The promise is that what could happen is, if you were able to just boost exposure, you triple these effects. If there's a third of the intended exposure, if you were to get to 100%, if you just extrapolate that, the promise is that it could be, 3 times larger, right? The question is like how to bring this about, right? And certainly one is tackling absenteeism up front. Something like school feeding could be very promising here to actually get kids to attend school, right? But the second piece is really, the amount of structure and that you provide to the teachers who are currently expected to implement the program, who are, given a lot of agency, which is great, right? But are not given a lot of structure, right? And I can't help myself comparing these very muted effects to what I just saw in Morocco, where the Moroccan government ran with their own adaptation of a teaching at the right level program, combined it with targeted, structured pedagogy, and structured it to the extreme and have a very, very different model of this, where even like in the remedial period, all the lessons are pre-prepared. Everything is given to a teacher, right? And all of, the classes are happening in a very, very structured way, right? And there the effects are 8 to 9 times larger than we see in Zambia. Over a course of a school year, we see effects that are 15 times as large as the effects in Zambia, right? So I think this is really where it shows you, like, it's not about the how. I think the how is great, and we're all convinced that the how, if you have been to a catch-up classroom, if it works, it looks amazing. The teachers love it. We see very quick gains, right? But like how to bring this about, right? And so I think both getting kids into school, but then combining it with structured pedagogy could both be very, very promising.
I think that makes great sense. Langston, what is Zambia doing on sort of core instruction? So we need less catch up, even though catch up is doing good work.
Good question. So what are we doing as a country to intensify teaching and learning in class? But before I answer that question, I still want to bring you to the first question that was, or first concerns or reflection that was done Why are we putting in good practices in catch up and instead of, doing more in class? And what I can say is that actually our teachers are learning a lot from catch up classes, and we are trying to do everything possible to look at the play-related activities brought in the medicine class. And we are encouraging our teachers every day that the best practices that you are getting from catch up, implementing them in your class. That is the conversation, and we are striving to do that. And again, there was a question to say, why do you continue? Why have you continued with remediation? Why don't we work towards the stopping remediation maybe completely so that we focus on other things? Again, we are dealing with children. Every day, children are being born, and children are born with different abilities. Others are coming from families where parents are reading and they are reading early in life. Others are coming from poor and vulnerable backgrounds. So in our context as a country, I don't think we'll reach a level where our learners that are age 6 getting into grade 1 have all the skills. So it means we need to start believing in a child that whether they come with skills or they don't come with skills, the school system will still provide remediation to them. So remediation in the Zambian context will continue being with us for as long as we keep generating children. But if we stop birth, then we can stop remediation.
Let's not do that. And I think you're right. I think, I just want to underline this point that, like, obviously we can improve education systems so there is less need for remediation, but there will always be a need for remediation in education systems. Even the best systems in the world have some degree of that. I'm gonna jump over. Langston, did you have one last point to make?
So now the question was, are you improving core skills in class? The answer is yes. We are striving to improve core skills. This year, I think we've had a lot of reflection meetings with VVOB, where I'm sitting with World Vision, with all the directorates. And what we are saying is that, one, let's continue training our teachers adequately. Training is continuous. Teacher training, capacity building is every day. Let's every day continue training our teachers, number one. Number two, let's provide adequate teaching and learning materials to our teachers so that our learners also have access to the teaching and learning materials. We are trying to reduce on the pupil book ratio. If we have adequate materials which children can borrow, go with it at home, I think it will help. We are trying to improve infrastructure. I think in Zambia, we have actually improved greatly. You may wish to know that at some point our learners were sitting on the floor, but now all the learners are seated in desks. Of course, we still have a problem of overcrowding, but I know with overcrowding, the quality is compromised. But we feel we've started the processes and we can do more to ensure we improve the core skills in class so that we reduce on catch-up. In fact, we have challenged some schools because some schools have asked us to say, why are we doing remediation? So we've told them, invite us to your school. We test all your learners. If all your learners are reading, then we'll tell you for you, no remediation. But if we find one learner not reading, we'll still ask you to provide support to that learner. So the bottom line is, let's reduce the number of learners in catch-up classes. 11 changes that we presented, one of them is to graduate or make the learners exit the catch-up.
Fabulous. No, thank you so much. I want to come to Daniil now. Andy and Langston both talked about kind of improvements in the program and, potential changes. Andy contrasted with the Morocco program. Obviously, you've got a big view of teaching at the right level. And so I would love to put these results in the context of what we're learning about teaching at the right level as we think about continuing to apply this in other countries. Like, what have we answered with this evaluation? And what are the most important things we need to learn?
Okay, great. Just a super simple question for like 3 minutes. Thanks. I also want to just acknowledge that I think some of the responses I have actually been highlighted by others like Jonathan and you, Dave. But let me add on to it from our perspective at TaRL Africa, where we're supporting ministries of education in a lot of different contexts. I think a few things that we feel like the evaluation has given us more insight on that help us answer something new. The big one is, can this work at scale? This question of government teachers, government program, nationally run with limited external NGO staff on the ground. Do we see the ability for it to be implemented and have results? And the answer is yes. And I think that's a huge point of reflection and celebration, because it shows that this model can, not even just the TaRL model, but the scaling model is possible in global education. And it's been quite a rarity to see this taking place. I also just want to acknowledge the fact that this has been a process since 2015, when the government first co-designed this model and selected it along with JPAL and Pratham, kind of a precursor to TaRL Africa. And so it's not a short response time, but it is really encouraging to see that over time you can run something at national scale and see impact. And that's what we have to do. I think the second piece on the difference in difference study that Andy shared, that's new information on durability. It offers questions as well as answers. Why do we see results over time with the learners? But it's encouraging because I think that's a sort of a systems level question, and it shows that there is the possibility of long-term outcomes, and that needs to be looked at more. At the same time, these questions are really important to reflect on, not just for the Zambian context, but globally. Or we can say at least on the continent, where I have more understanding of what we're seeing. These questions of things like the plateau at the word level, this is not unique to Zambia. We also had some indications that this could be the case in Cote d'Ivoire. There were different contexts, but there was another RCT that was taking place, and that had used French. And so we didn't know, like, how generalizable is this? But with two RCTs, this has become a huge priority for us as an organization to look at and think through practically. How do we boost learners away from just decoding into the highest level skills that they need to do comprehension, fluency, and so forth? So at the moment, we've actually redesigned and are working within 4 different countries to do learning on this, to basically understand whether, if we add more phonics, add more structure, and try different models of boosting these areas in both exposure and in new activities, whether that moves the needle on getting learners quickly up into those higher levels. I would say another cross-cutting observation is that this question on numeracy, that came out with the numeracy skills in particular, but it is a bit broad, around procedural versus kind of applied skills, is something that we're really interested in. So we're now doing multi-country evaluations using more diagnostic assessments than OSSER can give us, to look at where and how learners are getting stuck, if you will, and actually adding in questions to replicate what Andy put into the Zambian RCT across locations to better understand. So I don't think we have a full answer on that yet, but we're really interested to try and collect that data in a much larger swath to understand if this is contextual to Zambia or if this is actually a programmatic component. And I think the last thing I'll say is that, because I know we're short on time here, is that we're very focused on a new thing that has come out of this, I think, just with so much power, which is this attendance question and delivery. At the moment, we're having a hard time disentangling, in some ways, with this RCT, what would the impact look like if it was delivered versus what needs to be changed in the program design itself, if anything. So we're trialing different ways to tease that out, programmatically. But ultimately, the big question for us is, how do we support systems that are enabling, or maybe have suboptimal enabling conditions? How do we both engage in that systems change level and not just a programmatic level? And how do we improve measurement so we understand where to put time and energy globally in the education questions that we're trying to answer?
I think that's a fabulous point. Something I often think about when we think about the most cost-effective programs for boosting learning, and having contributed a little bit to this literature, this challenge that we often get high cost effectiveness for pedagogical interventions right at the top. But Langston talked about getting kids off the floors and onto seats. You're never going to get a high cost effectiveness sort of ratio for that, but you're also not going to see an amazing education system where all the kids are sitting on the floor, or where kids are absent 50% of the time, or where teachers are absent 50% of the time. We have these kind of fundamental conditions that are enabling, that allow these kids to flourish. I want to circle back. We've had a number of questions, and some of the discussion has been about teachers, right? And teachers who work in catch up, bringing those skills over, mentoring of teachers. At the same time, Andy showed us results that some teacher professional development in this program was not effective. So I just want to briefly, I'm going to ask Andy, tell us something about this teacher professional development that didn't work, so we know kind of what that was. And then briefly, and then I want to invite, I'll have a follow-up for Teresa, but I'm going to wait until we make sure they're back online. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you. Yes. So again, this continuous professional development program had come out of a qualitative study before and really tried to, bring together teachers in schools. Teachers had told us that they change their instruction if they collaborate more, are engaged more together, help each other solve problems together. And the CPD, the extra CPD intervention there is CPD as part of the program. There's CPD around, but the extra CPD that was provided to the teachers, we try to tap into that, support teachers, but also give them regular challenges where they would work together. And all of this professional development was aligned with the regular catch-up calendar, such that, for example, at the beginning of the school year, teachers would be focused on assessments. The catch-up challenge for that period would be around assessments and trying to get teachers to collaborate more and work more together. Right? What we learned more qualitatively is that the intervention landed much more as a chore, as an extra box to tick. So teachers did very much engage in this and very much engage, for example, in these challenges, right? But what we hear is that they more thought of or perceived of them as like yet another thing that I need to do, right? And then when we look at data that we collected on such things as teacher collaboration in the RCT, where we randomized this out, we actually now have very good evidence that teachers did not collaborate more. They didn't feel more that, they became a community of colleagues who would work on these things, such as the assessment challenge together, right? And then perhaps it's unsurprising, right? Like if the very intervention that was intended to promote, collaboration did not improve collaboration, that then also we don't see any additional learning gains. So that's really, we can really very cleanly pinpoint where that theory of change fell flat.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. I think that's crucial. And figuring out, I've done some work on teacher professional development, and I strongly believe that most teacher professional development is bad and useless, and that some teacher professional development can be incredibly effective, can really help them change their practice. And figuring out what are the activities is absolutely crucial. Teresa, do you want to say anything about, we've heard a little bit about like mentoring teachers. How did that work in the context of this program or more broadly?
Okay, thanks. So one of the things that have worked very well is actually going into schools and actually visiting the teachers and doing on-site mentoring. So we have mentors in schools, we have mentors at the zonal level, we have mentors at the district and national level. And what usually happens is, as partners, we'll not go into the schools alone, we'll go with Ministry of Education. And once you find a challenge that the school is having, you actually work on this, addressing this together. But what's also working very well is learning through different studies that we're doing. For example, we have some work that we're doing at the middle tier where we're trying to see how can we then improve on the mentoring support that the middle tier level, which is like the district and the zonal level, is giving towards the teachers, and can this further improve on the learning outcomes. So these studies are helping us understand broadly on how exactly what models or practices can be used given the different challenges that Ministry of Education is facing around mentoring support. And I think one of the things, as we will go on, one of the things that we'll continue to do, we have some work that we're doing on numeracy pedagogy, structured pedagogy, and literacy structured pedagogy. And this is currently being piloted, and it will actually inform some of the changes that Ministry has proposed towards the program. But you can actually see that through this structured pedagogy and through the insights that I think have come through the RCT and other studies, you actually notice that actually this structured pedagogy is actually working for the teachers, and they're responding very well to the materials that are provided to them. And this will answer both the remedial challenges that are there, but also for habit and ensure that the challenges that are first in the first years, which is grade 1 and 2, are addressed, because some of it is actually at those levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have more questions for all of our panelists, and we are out of time. And so, there were a number of, in the last minute, if any of the panelists want to, there are a few technical questions in the Q&A about like what the language of instruction, if any, or how learning outcomes were measured, if anybody wants to answer those. I just want to underline what we see here is a program that has been brought to very large scale, right? We see big numeracy outcomes. We see modest literacy outcomes, and we see some real implementation challenges that we could point to, and that the government is, or that the program is incorporating in terms of like starting at an earlier grade, and definitely areas to think about how implementation can be strengthened. So we see even larger short-term gains. We do see some very suggestive, promising long-term gains, which are exciting. And so there's a lot to learn here, and both within Zambia and beyond. And I'll be very excited to follow the next generation, both of children learning to read, and the next generation of evidence on how to help more children do that. I'm going to pass it back to Maddie for a little logistics.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for attending and joining today. And a big, big thank you to all of the panelists for such thought-provoking reflections. And Dave for just excellent moderation and keeping this so conversational and cohesive. So we hope everyone found this as fascinating as I did, and as I think we all did. Please do stay in touch with us, keep up with us on our socials and via our newsletter. I've dropped some links in the chat. At the very end is also a 2-page policy brief on the evaluation, if you want to read about the sort of high-level results, to complement the full paper that we dropped in the chat earlier of Andy's. So thank you all so much, and wishing everyone a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. This one is gone.
Thanks so much, Teresa.
Yes,
Langston,
thanks, Teresa.
Dave,
Thanks,
thank you
Langston, for
all.
making the going from
Thank
office
you.
to
Bye-bye.
office.
Yes.
Great to meet you both.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Maddie,
Yep.
are you able to kind of consolidate these questions? TaRL Africa is trying to pull together a kind of broad FAQ, and I feel like this is a good way to identify some of the common questions that would be able to be addressed from a natural source.
Yes,
Yeah.
So I was
absolutely.
interested to know if that's something that you could share with us.
Yep, we actually have a running doc already with all of the questions in. So we can send that out to everyone, all the panelists, right afterwards, so you all have access to the questions as well.
Oh, that would be great. I do appreciate it. And thank you so much for organizing this. Dr.
Yeah.
Chibuye, nice to see you. Thank you for joining from Zambia. Same with you, Teresa. And thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Everybody.
All right, thank
I'm
you.
going to drop now. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.